In the last few hours, the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, has outlined a raft of measures for the hospitality sector following a sharp uptick in coronavirus infections.
The facts are stark. Unless we respond now to the growing number of people infected with the virus, between 1,000 and 1,700 preventable deaths could take place over the winter period.
So pubs, bars, restaurants will only be allowed to remain open until that date at time of 6 p.m. on Friday and operate takeaways afterwards. Cinemas, bowling alleys, other indoor entertainment venues will also close, but non-essential retail, hairdressers, gyms and leisure centres can stay open. Let's speak to Neil Hamilton, who's the UKIP Interim Leader for Mid and West Wales. Welcome, Neil. Good to have you with us. Is Wales closed for Christmas?
Well, it sounds as though the Welsh Government intends to try and turn Wales into another kind of North Korea, a joyless paradise. I don't know if they'll lock us down over Christmas, but their finger is always on the button to do so. And I predicted when this latest lockdown, or firebreak as they called it, was introduced, that all they would do is delay the onset of the virus, because we know until a vaccine is actually rolled out and becomes effective, there is no means of stopping the virus. So, yeah, it's fair enough if there's a crisis in hospital beds and so on and so forth, but we haven't had that. So I don't see this as being any more than a wholly disproportionate sledgehammer to crack a nut policy on the part of the Welsh Government that's always in favour of bossing people about and stopping them doing things.
And unprecedented, I think. I think Northern Ireland might have done the alcohol ban thing, but you can go to a pub, but you can't have a beer.
Well, it's preposterous, isn't it? Utterly preposterous. So who's going to open on that basis? What they're trying to do is utterly destroy the hospitality business in Wales, which, of course, impacts on the tourism business. This has been a disastrous year from which many, many businesses will not survive. And if they can't even operate on a low-level basis throughout the winter, they won't be here next summer. So, I mean, this is a catastrophic decision. I heard Mark Drakeford say, we could be 1,700 preventable deaths over the winter if we don't do what we're doing now. Well, you could say the same thing about deaths on the road, couldn't you? Therefore, we have to ban the car because 2,000 people are killed in road accidents every year. We've got to have a sense of proportion about this. By all means, people have got to take sensible precautions in their own interests. We don't go clubbing and doing other things which put us, certainly my wife and my age group, at risk. And we limit the number of friends that we see and so on and so forth. But it's ultimately up to individuals to decide for themselves what's in their best interests. And taking draconian measures such as the Welsh Government has done is going to do more harm than good.
Yeah, is there any opposition to this? I mean, I appreciate your position on this, but what is Mr. Drakeford's position in the Assembly in terms of how much he's up against it? Are there many voices protesting against this? We know that in Westminster there's 100, maybe more Conservatives. You remember the Conservatives, Neil Hamilton, that are going to protest against Mr. Johnson, we understand. Is there anything similar going on in Wales?
Well, what we have in Wales is a Tory party which is kind of milk and water, half opposition to the Welsh Government. They're in a permanent minority. In the 20 years that the Welsh Parliament has existed, we've always had a Labour government, propped up by their little helpers in Plaid Cymru and the Lib Dems when they need it. But the Tories are totally ineffectual in opposition, and they're crippled by political correctness, and they've offered no real opposition on coronavirus. I mean, the latest set of regulations about the firebreak, they did object to, but hitherto they've not provided any kind of reasoned opposition. I mean, I've spoken against these regulations right from day one, and I've made my speeches on the basis of the facts as we knew at the time about coronavirus and how it was being dealt with in other parts of the world. And nobody I've seen has produced any real justification for the kind of draconian lockdowns that we've had in Wales and indeed now have in England as well. So when are people going to rise up against governments, I wonder, that are curtailing our liberties in an unprecedented way?
What do you do with that argument, though, Neil Hamilton, when, I mean, I know you suggested that the hospitals aren't full, But that's always the argument that comes back, isn't it? That there are more people in hospital than there would be due to COVID. And this is where I kind of feel compromised, because I don't know the answer to that. If a clinician or a politician says to me, well, we normally have 20 people in this unit, but we've got 120, what choice do I have but to run with the clinical interpretation of things?
I can tell you my own experience. Now, I represent Mid and West Wales in the Welsh Parliament. I've got two health boards. One of them represents Cardiganshire, or Ceredigion as we now call it, Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire. I had a meeting with the health board last Friday. There are 89 people in hospital in COVID-related conditions. That compares with 85 3 weeks ago. So, we're not dealing in our area with a rampant disease that's carrying all before it. And there are parts of Wales where there is no problem. There are, in the urban areas of Wales, Cardiff, Newport, Merthyr Tydfil, some places like that, their experience is much worse than others. But to impose a lockdown, therefore, on the whole country, whether they need to or not, is completely insupportable. And even in the case of urban areas, I don't know that the hospitals are actually flooded with COVID victims. Most 99% plus of cases of COVID pass off without undue incident. The number of people who are seriously ill with COVID and in intensive care is very, very small. And what we should be doing, of course, is concentrating on the problem rather than having this broad brush approach, which is closing everything down, wrecking the economy. And without a healthy economy, we can't fund the health service, except by creating funny money, which the Bank of England is doing as though it's going out of fashion, creating problems for the future. We've got nearly 40,000 people in that one health board that I've just referred to who've been waiting for 36 weeks or more for other serious and sometimes life-threatening conditions to be dealt with. Cancers are going undiagnosed, and there are delays to treatment. The people are in pain through having to delay hip operations, knee operations, etc., etc. This is taking a terrible toll in many, many ways, not just economic.
Neil Hamilton, thank you. I think many of our listeners would echo certainly that last point as well. Neil Hamilton is the UKIP interim leader for Mid and West Wales in the Welsh Parliament.